Blood drained from Stephanie's face as she recognized the passenger she'd just humiliated. The first-class ticket in his hand matched the name on his employee badge, Darius Washington, CEO. Her career flashed before her eyes. 6 minutes ago, she'd been untouchable. Now, everything was about to change. Before we dive into this shocking story, where are you watching from today? Hit that like button if you've ever witnessed discrimination while traveling. And subscribe to never miss another jaw-dropping story of justice served. Now, let's rewind to see exactly how Stephanie's perfect career imploded in just 6 minutes. Darius Washington had never believed in silver spoons. At 42, the self-made billionaire CEO of Skyroute Airlines carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned every step of his journey. His dark skin had gleamed under the harsh fluorescent lights of South Chicago airport terminals, long before it glowed under the spotlights of corporate boardrooms. That morning, as sunlight spilled through the windows of his downtown penthouse, Darius bypassed his usual tailored suits. Instead, he pulled on a pair of dark jeans and a simple navy button-up shirt. Today wasn't about intimidation or power plays. It was about truth. "How will anyone recognize you dressed like that?" his assistant tailor had asked when he mentioned his plan to fly incognito. Darius had just smiled. That's exactly the point. 3 weeks ago, Skyroute Airlines had completed its acquisition of struggling Celestial Airways in a business coup that dominated headlines across the aviation industry. The move had expanded Skyroute's fleet by 30% and added 16 international destinations to their routes. Wall Street celebrated. Celestial's shareholders breathed sighs of relief. But Darius wasn't celebrating yet. An airline is only as good as its people. He often said in interviews, it was a philosophy forged during his early days as a baggage handler at O'Hare International, working through college, learning every facet of the business from the ground up. While other executives viewed airplanes as assets on spreadsheets, Darius saw the human infrastructure that kept them flying. And today, he would see exactly what kind of human infrastructure he had just purchased. The undercover boss approach wasn't new, but Darius had refined it into an art. No camera crews, no dramatic reveals. Just a keen observer experiencing his newly acquired airline as any passenger would. His security team had protested, but Darius had been adamant. "How can I fix what I can't see?" 15 miles away, in a suburban apartment decorated in neutral tones and generic artwork, Stephanie Miller was completing her own morning routine with military precision. 10 years as a Celestial Airways flight attendant had instilled habits that bordered on superstitious ritual. Uniform pressed crisp enough to cut paper, hair pulled back tight enough to smooth any potential wrinkles, makeup applied with surgical precision, enough to appear polished, not enough to look unprofessional. The perfect balance of authority and approachability that had made her one of Celestial's most recognized senior flight attendants. What her immaculate appearance concealed was a carefully calibrated system of biases, developed and refined over a decade of service. Stephanie prided herself on being able to read passengers instantly, first class or economy, frequent flyer or occasional traveler, potential troublemaker or model passenger. These silent calculations happened dozens of times daily, often before a passenger had spoken a single word. Another day managing the skies, she murmured to her reflection, practicing her professional smile, the smile that had charmed the former CEO during a turbulent flight years ago, securing her position as an untouchable fixture at Celestial despite multiple passenger complaints that mysteriously disappeared from her file. The morning news played softly in the background. Something about Skyroute finalizing the Celestial acquisition. Stephanie barely registered it. Corporate shuffles came and went. She had survived for CEOs and countless restructurings. This would be no different. Time to rule the clouds, she said, grabbing her roller bag and heading for the door. Chicago O'Hare International Airport bustled with its usual controlled chaos. Celestial Flight 457 to San Francisco was scheduled for an on-time departure at 10:15 a.m. Gate C-20 to gradually filled with passengers, business travelers tapping impatiently on laptops, families corralling excited children, solo travelers lost in podcasts or paperbacks. Stephanie arrived at precisely 8:45 a.m., nodding curtly to the gate agents and her fellow flight attendants. Jordan Chen, a 5-year veteran with Celestial, offered a friendly wave that Stephanie acknowledged with the barest minimum of professional courtesy. She had never warmed to Jordan, finding him too accommodating to difficult passengers, a weakness in Stephanie's carefully constructed worldview. "Full flight today," Jordan noted, scrolling through the passenger manifest on his tablet. 12 in first class, all boarded except seat 2A. Stephanie glanced at the information. Washington, Darius, probably running late. These business types always think they're special. What she didn't notice was Jordan's slight frown at her tone, or the way his eyes lingered on the name a moment too long. At the opposite end of the terminal, Darius Washington walked unhurriedly toward gate C22, observing everything. He noted the worn carpeting near the gates, the slightly outdated signage, the Celestial staff who seemed efficient but rarely smiled. All data points for the comprehensive evaluation. Forming in his mind, the boarding area was thinning out as he approached. Perfect timing, late enough to observe most of the boarding process, early enough to avoid delaying departure. Through the large windows, he could see the Celestial Airways Airbus A320, its once distinctive silver and blue livery soon to be replaced with Skyroute's red and gold. By the jetway entrance, a flight attendant with impeccably styled blonde hair and perfect posture was checking boarding passes with mechanical efficiency. Stephanie Miller, according to her name badge. Darius made a mental note as he approached. His first-class boarding pass ready. The first-class line was empty now. All other premium passengers already aboard. As Darius stepped forward, he caught a subtle shift in Stephanie's expression, a slight narrowing of the eyes, a barely perceptible tightening of her professionally fixed smile. It was an expression Darius Washington had seen countless times before. "Excuse me, sir." Stephanie's voice carried a sharp edge beneath its honeyed surface. "Economy boarding hasn't started yet. This line is for first-class passengers only." Darius extended his boarding pass without comment, his expression neutral. The document clearly displayed his first-class seat assignment, 2A. Stephanie barely glanced at it. Before responding, "There must be some mistake. This is the first-class line." Her voice rose slightly, ensuring nearby passengers could hear. "Economy boarding will begin in approximately 15 minutes. There's no mistake." Darius replied evenly. "I have a first-class ticket, seat 2A. Several nearby passengers looked up from their phones. Sensing the brewing confrontation, Stephanie's smile remained fixed as she finally looked at the boarding pass, her eyes narrowing as she studied it with exaggerated scrutiny. "This is unusual," she said, her tone suggesting she'd discovered a counterfeit rather than a valid ticket. "How did you come to have this seat assignment?" "I purchased it," Darius said simply. Like everyone else, a muscle twitched in Stephanie's jaw. "May I see some identification?" "Please." Darius produced his driver's license, maintaining the calm demeanor that had served him through countless boardroom battles. He was keenly aware of the growing audience, the gate agent looking up from her computer, the family in the economy line watching with uncomfortable expressions, the businessman who had stopped his phone conversation to observe. Stephanie held the license and boarding pass side by side, examining them as if searching for discrepancies. Finding none, she shifted tactics. "Are you certain you're at the right gate, Mr. Washington?" Her emphasis on his name carried a subtle implication that it might not actually belong to him. "I'm certain," Darius replied. Stephanie's smile tightened further. "It's just that we have a very specific manifest, and sometimes the system makes mistakes with seat assignments. I wouldn't want you to board incorrectly and then have to be reseated. It can be quite embarrassing." The threat was thinly veiled. Comply now or face public humiliation later. It was a tactic Darius had seen deployed against people who looked like him countless times. "The system hasn't made a mistake," he stated firmly. "I have a valid first-class ticket for this flight." Stephanie's expression hardened. She turned to a nearby security officer who had been observing the exchange. "Officer Reynolds, could you assist us, please? We seem to have a boarding discrepancy." The security officer approached, his expression professionally neutral, but his eyes conveying discomfort with the situation. What seems to be the problem? This gentleman is attempting to board in first class, but there appears to be some confusion with his documentation. Stephanie explained, her tone suggesting she was protecting the airline rather than harassing a passenger. Officer Reynolds reviewed the boarding pass and ID. Everything looks in order to me, ma'am. Mr. Washington has a valid first-class ticket. Stephanie's composure slipped momentarily. I understand that, but given the unusual circumstances, I believe we should verify with the gate manager. What unusual circumstances? Darius asked calmly, though he knew exactly what she meant. The question hung in the air. Officer Reynolds shifted uncomfortably, clearly unwilling to participate in what he was recognizing as discrimination. Several passengers had now openly abandoned any pretense of not watching, some with phones discreetly raised. Stephanie lowered her voice, leaning closer to Darius. Sir, I'm simply trying to ensure everyone is where they belong. If you'd be more comfortable waiting in the economy line until we sort this out. I belong in first class, Darius interrupted, his voice still measured but firm. Where I would have been seated 5 minutes ago if my ticket had been in someone else's hand. The statement landed with precision. A few passengers nodded in agreement. Officer Reynolds took a small step back, silently removing himself from Stephanie's side of the confrontation. Recognizing her eroding position, Stephanie changed tactics again. Anthony. She called to the gate manager who was reviewing paperwork nearby. Could you address this boarding issue, please? I need to begin preparation for departure. Anthony. Scott, Celestial's gate manager for 10 years, approached with a professional smile that froze the instant he saw Darius Washington standing there. The clipboard in his hand nearly slipped from his fingers. Is there a problem with my boarding pass? Darius asked, maintaining his role as a passenger rather than revealing his position. Anthony's eyes darted from Darius to Stephanie and back again. No, sir, Mr. Washington. There's absolutely no problem. Please, allow me to personally escort you aboard. Stephanie's expression shifted from righteous confidence to confusion. Anthony, I was just explaining to this gentleman that Ms. Miller, Anthony cut in, his voice tight with controlled panic. Mr. Washington's documentation is perfectly in order. He should be boarded immediately. Darius observed the interaction silently, his phone recording in his pocket. Throughout the 6-minute confrontation, he had maintained his composure while experiencing the familiar burn of public humiliation, the same feeling he'd encountered repeatedly throughout his rise from baggage handler to CEO. As Anthony nervously gestured toward the jetway, Darius made his decision. Rather than revealing his position immediately, he would board as planned. The humiliation Stephanie had intended for him would instead become the spotlight illuminating exactly what he'd purchased, along with Celestial Airways. Thank you, Anthony, Darius said, walking past a visibly confused Stephanie. As he entered the jetway, he checked his watch. Exactly 6 minutes had passed since he'd first approached the counter. Behind him, he could hear Anthony's urgent whisper to Stephanie, Do you have any idea who that is? The realization hit Stephanie like a bucket of ice water. Her hand flew to her mouth as Anthony's whispered explanation penetrated her consciousness. Darius Washington, CEO of SkyRoute Airlines, the company that had just acquired Celestial Airways, the most powerful man in the industry, and she had just treated him like an imposter. That can't be him, she hissed back, desperation creeping into her voice. The CEO would be traveling with an entourage, in a suit, not alone in casual clothes. Anthony's expression was a mixture of horror and disbelief. It's definitely him. I've seen him in person at the acquisition meeting last month. Stephanie, do you realize what you've done? The air around Stephanie seemed to thin, making it difficult to breathe. Her mind raced through the interaction, replaying each dismissive comment, each condescending look, each moment of unwarranted suspicion she had directed at one of the most influential executives in the aviation industry. He was testing us, Anthony muttered, running a hand over his face. It's a technique he's known for, experiencing his airlines as a regular passenger. Round them, the remaining passengers continued boarding, many casting curious glances. At the visibly shaken flight attendant, some had witnessed the entire interaction. Others were picking up on the palpable tension at the gate. "Mr. Scott," called a frantic voice. It was Jordan, emerging from the jetway with wide eyes. "Is it true? Was that really Darius Washington?" Anthony nodded grimly in the flesh. "The captain needs to know immediately," Jordan said. "And the crew, they're still treating him like a regular passenger." As Jordan hurried back onto the plane, Anthony turned to Stephanie, his voice low and urgent. 6 minutes. It took 6 minutes from when he approached the counter for the situation to completely derail your career, possibly mine, who knows. How many others? Stephanie's professional mask had completely crumbled. "I need to apologize. I can explain that I was just being thorough, following security protocols. Don't." Anthony cut her off. "Just don't make it worse. Board the plane, do your job, and pray he's as understanding as his reputation suggests." With leaden feet, Stephanie made her way down the jetway, her mind still struggling to process the magnitude of her mistake. In her 10 years at Celestial, she had developed a sense of invulnerability. Her connections with the former CEO had shielded her from consequences despite numerous incidents similar to this one. But those connections meant nothing now. In 6 minutes, everything had changed. Have you ever misjudged someone and immediately regretted it? Comment number 1 if you've ever had that stomach-dropping moment when you realized you made a terrible mistake about someone. Like this video if you believe everyone deserves to be treated with respect, regardless of how they're dressed. Subscribe to see more stories of instant karma. Now, what do you think will happen when Stephanie steps onto that plane? Will she try to make amends, or will she make the situation even worse? As Stephanie entered the aircraft, the atmosphere had noticeably shifted. Her fellow crew members moved with heightened alertness, exchanging meaningful glances and hushed whispers. News was spreading through the cabin crew like wildfire. "Is it true?" whispered Lisa, another flight attendant, as Stephanie passed through the galley. "The new CEO is on board, into A." Stephanie couldn't bring herself to respond. Through the curtain separating first class from the galley, she could see Darius Washington sitting calmly in his seat, reviewing documents on a tablet. He looked perfectly at ease, as if the confrontation at the gate had never happened. Yet Stephanie knew better. Men like him didn't achieve such success by forgetting or forgiving such treatment. In the cockpit, Captain Reynolds was receiving the news with a grim expression. "Washington is on board, today of all days." He shook his head, thinking of the memo all Celestial employees had received just yesterday about sky routes, commitment to excellence, and warning that evaluation of all staff would begin immediately. And Stephanie gave him trouble at boarding. The first officer added quietly, "It's all over the terminal already." Someone posted a video. Back in first class, passengers were settling in, many sneaking glances at Darius. Some recognized him now that they were looking more closely. The billionaire CEO had been featured in numerous business magazines and news segments, particularly since the high-profile acquisition of Celestial Airways. A senior business traveler across the aisle leaned toward Darius. "Mr. Washington, James Thornton, Princeton Capital." That was quite a scene at the gate. "Happens to me sometimes too, though I suspect for different reasons." He gestured to his own aging face with a knowing look. Darius offered a measured smile. "Mr. Thornton, the investment world's loss was clearly aviation's gain. I followed your career with interest." The recognition of a fellow industry leader momentarily caught the attention of nearby passengers and crew. The whispers intensified. Any lingering doubts about the passenger's identity vanished. In the main cabin, Jordan was frantically briefing the rest of the crew. "It's definitely him. The Darius Washington and Stephanie." He lowered his voice. Stephanie treated him like he was trying to sneak into first class. "Oh God," groaned another attendant, "after what happened with the Thompson family last month." "She's done." Jordan's expression was somber. "We all might be. Remember the memo? Evaluation of all staff will begin immediately. This isn't a coincidence." As the final preparations for departure continued, Stephanie remained in the galley, her hands shaking as she arranged the first-class meal trays. In just 6 minutes, her entire career had been placed on a knife's edge. 10 years of building connections and carefully navigating corporate politics, undone by one interaction. The realization was sinking in like a stone. This wasn't just about her job. This was about who she was, the assumptions she made, the way she treated people based on appearance alone. For the first time, those assumptions might actually cost her something. A notification chimed on several crew members' phones simultaneously. A social media alert about Celestial Airways. Someone had already uploaded a video of the gate incident. It was spreading rapidly, with comments flooding and condemning the treatment Darius had received. Anthony's words echoed in Stephanie's mind. 6 minutes. It took 6 minutes for the situation to completely derail. The clock was ticking, and Stephanie knew her time was running out. The first-class cabin hummed with an undercurrent of tension that belied its luxurious surroundings. Darius Washington sat in seat 2A, seemingly absorbed in his tablet, yet acutely aware of everything happening around him. His trained eye caught every nervous glance from the cabin crew, every whispered exchange, every forced smile directed his way. Stephanie had managed to avoid direct interaction thus far, sending other attendants to offer Darius pre-flight beverages and amenities. Her avoidance tactic might have worked if not for the flight's staffing assignment. She was the designated first-class attendant for this journey. Service with a smile. Jordan whispered to her as they prepared drinks in the galley. He hasn't said anything yet. Maybe he's willing to overlook it. Stephanie's hands trembled slightly as she arranged crystal glasses on a silver tray. 10 years at Celestial. Perfect record. I can't lose everything over one misunderstanding. Jordan's expression remained diplomatic, though his thoughts were less charitable. Her perfect record existed only because complaints against her had mysteriously disappeared, something many crew members suspected but none could prove. Just be professional, he advised, and maybe exceptionally apologetic. Taking a deep breath, Stephanie pushed through the curtain with her service cart. Her practiced smile felt brittle as she approached Darius's seat first. Good morning, Mr. Washington. May I offer you something to drink before takeoff? Her voice strained for its usual confident tone. Darius looked up from his tablet, his expression unreadable. Sparkling water. Thank you. No mention of the gate incident. No immediate termination. A small flicker of hope ignited in Stephanie's chest as she poured his drink with exaggerated care. Is this your first time flying Celestial Airways, sir? She asked, attempting normal conversation. In a manner of speaking, Darius replied, accepting the glass. Though I've become quite familiar with the company recently, the double meaning wasn't lost on Stephanie. She nodded stiffly and continued her service, acutely aware of Darius observing her interactions with other passengers. As she served an elderly black woman in 3C, Stephanie overcompensated with excessive friendliness. The woman regarded her with a knowing look that suggested she'd witnessed the gate incident. First time in first class, dear, the woman commented. My children upgraded me as a birthday surprise. How wonderful. Stephanie replied with a brightness that sounded forced even to her own ears. Happy birthday, ma'am. Thank you. Though I almost didn't make it here. Had a bit of trouble at the gate myself. Someone thought I might be in the wrong line too. The woman's pointed gaze made it clear she knew exactly what had happened with Darius. Stephanie's smile faltered. I'm very sorry to hear that, Mum. To seats ahead. Darius had heard the exchange. He made a note on his tablet without looking up. Throughout the drink service, Stephanie noticed Darius observing her pattern. She served white passengers with her standard efficiency, but when she reached passengers of color, his attention visibly sharpened. Under his scrutiny, she became painfully aware of subtle differences in her own behavior. The slightly shorter interactions, the less personalized service, the assumption that non-white passengers needed guidance with the seat functions rather than being asked if they required assistance. These were patterns she had never consciously acknowledged to herself, yet they were clearly visible to someone looking for them. James Thornton, the business executive from Princeton Capital, leaned toward Darius again once Stephanie had moved further down the cabin. Quite the performance, he murmured. You know, I fly this route twice monthly. That attendant has a reputation, does she? Darius responded, his interest genuine. Thornton nodded. My colleague Nathan Wong refuses to fly Celestial because of an incident with her last year, said he'd never been so humiliated. And he's flown over to Million Miles. And the airline's response? That's just it. According to Nathan, his formal complaint vanished into thin air. Called customer service 3 times, each time being told it was under review. Eventually, he gave up and took his business elsewhere. Darius nodded thoughtfully. A shame when one person can damage an entire company's reputation. Exactly. Thornton agreed, though perhaps things will improve under new management. The knowing look he gave Darius made it clear he understood exactly who he was speaking with. As the plane reached cruising altitude, Darius opened his tablet to a private folder labeled Celestial Integration. Within it, he navigated to employee records that SkyRoute's transition team had flagged for review. Stephanie Miller's file was prominently marked. The official record showed a 10-year veteran with commendations and no formal complaints. But the transition team had discovered a shadow system, a secondary database where certain complaints were redirected and essentially buried within this hidden repository. Stephanie Miller's name appeared 17 times in the past 3 years alone. The complaints followed a pattern: passengers of color reporting dismissive treatment, seating errors that moved them from premium cabins, excessive scrutiny of their tickets and identification, and a consistent tone of suspicion regarding their presence in first or business class. What was equally concerning were notes attached to several complaints indicating executive intervention evidence that the previous administration had deliberately protected Stephanie despite a clear pattern of problematic behavior. In seat 4B, a young black woman was attempting to store her designer handbag when Stephanie approached. "I'll need to check that, ma'am," Stephanie stated. "It's oversized for the cabin." "But it fits under the seat," the woman protested, demonstrating, "and that gentleman's briefcase is larger." She nodded toward a white male passenger whose large leather attaché case had received no comment. Darius watched as Stephanie insisted until Jordan intervened, quietly confirming the bag was within size regulations. The young woman's expression of resigned familiarity with such treatment spoke volumes. Turbulence struck suddenly, causing the plane to lurch. The fastened seatbelt sign illuminated with a chime. Stephanie, caught in the aisle, grabbed the nearest seat for support, which happened to be Darius's. Their eyes met for a brief moment, hers wide with fear that had nothing to do with the turbulence, his steady and evaluative. In that moment of unintentional connection, Stephanie saw something that frightened her more than losing her job: recognition. Darius Washington recognized exactly who she was and what she represented. As the turbulence subsided, Stephanie retreated to the galley, her composed facade crumbling. The 6 minutes at the gate now felt like a lifetime ago, the beginning of an inevitable end that was drawing closer with each passing moment. As the plane leveled out, Darius closed his eyes briefly, the encounter with Stephanie triggering memories he typically kept carefully compartmentalized. 20 years of corporate success hadn't erased the sting of countless similar interactions. He remembered his first week as a baggage handler at O'Hare, age 19, being stopped by security 3 times while walking to his assigned terminal. His supervisor had finally issued him an oversized ID badge to wear visibly at all times. To avoid confusion, he remembered his first business trip as a junior executive, upgraded to first class for working through the weekend. The flight attendant, who had loudly asked if he was sure he was in the right seat, checking his ticket 3 times while white passengers boarded without scrutiny. He remembered the board meeting 5 years ago, arriving early to prepare the conference room. The new receptionist who had assumed he was part of the cleaning staff, directing him to the service elevator. The frozen looks on the board members' faces when he later walked in and took his seat at the head of the table. Each incident had shaped him, hardened his resolve, informed his management philosophy. SkyRoute Airlines had the most diverse executive team in the industry and the strictest anti-discrimination policies, not because it was trendy or politically correct, but because Darius Washington understood firsthand the cost of allowing bias to flourish unchecked. On his tablet, he opened a document titled SkyRoute Workplace Culture Covenant. The first line read, "Every employee, customer, and partner deserves to be judged solely on the content of their character and the quality of their work. Below it, in bold, zero tolerance for discrimination in any form, no exceptions, no second chances. Darius had personally terminated 3 executives and numerous staff who violated this principle. The message was clear throughout SkyRoute: performance mattered, background didn't, and treating anyone as less than meant immediate dismissal. His thoughts were interrupted by a notification. The corporate communications team had forwarded a social media alert. The video of his confrontation with Stephanie was gaining traction online. The comments were overwhelmingly supportive of Darius and critical of Celestial Airways. As he scrolled through the responses, another message appeared from his chief of staff. Previous incidents involving S. Miller attached. Legal has concerns about pattern of behavior. The attached file contained documentation of complaints similar to what he'd already reviewed, but with additional context from interviews with other Celestial staff. Meanwhile, in the galley, Stephanie was having her own reckoning with the past. Each interaction with Darius brought back memories of passengers she'd dismissed, complaints she'd laughed off, colleagues she'd undermined. She particularly remembered Thomas Jenkins, a black flight attendant who had reported her for creating a hostile work environment 2 years ago. She had leveraged her relationship with the former CEO to have Jenkins transferred, then later terminated for performance issues. Now, for the first time, she wondered if her actions had been driven not by professional concerns, but by something far more insidious within herself. Jordan entered the galley, breaking her reverie. "You need to pull it together," he whispered. "Urgently, everyone can see you're falling apart." "What would you do?" Stephanie hissed back. "He's going to fire me. We both know it." Jordan's expression hardened slightly. "Maybe it's deserved, Stephanie. That man into A. He built his entire career on merit. Started at the bottom, worked harder than everyone else, earned every promotion. And you treated him like he didn't belong because of what? His skin color, his casual clothes." "It wasn't about that," she protested weakly. "It was about security." "Protocols. Stop it." Jordan cut her off. "I've worked with you for 5 years. I've seen how you treat certain passengers differently. We all have. We just never said anything because you were untouchable." His words landed like physical blows. I don't remember the Thompson family last month, the black couple with their 2 children who had first-class tickets. You made them show their IDs 3 times and questioned how they could afford the tickets. The husband is a neurosurgeon, Stephanie, and his wife is a federal judge. Stephanie fell silent, the weight of Jordan's words crushing her practiced defenses. "The difference is," Jordan continued quietly, "those passengers couldn't fire you. This one can, and based on what I know about Darius Washington, he absolutely will." Across the Atlantic, in SkyRoute's London office, Vice President of Operations Nadia Williams was reviewing the same video that was circulating online. She immediately recognized her boss and friend. Despite his casual attire, her finger hovered over the dial button, knowing Darius would have his phone in airplane mode. Instead, she sent a text he would receive upon landing. "Saw the video. Classic DW move. Need statement from Corp Comms. Also, remember what happened at United Acquisition. Systemic issues, not just one person." Nadia was referencing SkyRoute's acquisition of United Regional 3 years earlier, where an initial incident had revealed a pattern of discriminatory practices throughout the company. Darius had ultimately replaced 60% of the management team and implemented a comprehensive cultural overhaul. Back on the plane, Darius was reviewing historical data on Celestial's employee complaint system. The pattern was troubling but familiar. Minorities and women faced higher scrutiny, harsher consequences for mistakes, and more barriers to advancement than their white male counterparts. Stephanie Miller wasn't an anomaly. She was a symptom of a corporate culture that had enabled and even rewarded her behavior. Her connections to the previous CEO had made her untouchable, creating a ripple effect throughout the organization, where others either emulated her approach or remained silent about its impact. The stark contrast between SkyRoute's inclusive culture and Celestial's problematic one was precisely Why Darius had instituted the undercover evaluation program. Spreadsheets and HR reports could identify financial inefficiencies, but only direct experience could reveal the human cost of a toxic workplace culture. As the beverage service concluded, Darius saved his notes and closed his tablet. The real-world test of Celestial's service had yielded more actionable data than weeks of formal evaluation might have. The 6-minute confrontation at the gate had illuminated years of systemic issues that would need to be addressed. For Stephanie Miller, the clock was ticking toward an inevitable reckoning. But for Darius Washington, this was about much more than one flight attendant. It was about transforming an entire organization and ensuring that no passenger would ever be made to feel they didn't belong simply because of how they looked. Midway through the flight, the unavoidable moment arrived. Stephanie could no longer delegate her responsibilities in first class without drawing attention to her avoidance of Darius. With lunch service beginning, she squared her shoulders and pushed her cart forward, the practiced smile feeling like a grimace on her face. Our lunch options today are herb-crusted chicken or vegetarian pasta, she announced to the first-class cabin, her voice betraying only the slightest tremor. Both are served with a seasonal salad and freshly baked rolls. As she worked her way through the cabin, Stephanie made a conscious effort to provide consistent service to each passenger, hyper-aware of Darius watching her every move. When she finally reached his seat, she forced herself to meet his eyes. "Mr. Washington, what can I offer you for lunch today?" "The chicken, please," he replied evenly. Then, as she placed his tray, he added, "Ms. Miller, I'd like to ask you a few questions about Celestial's customer service policies. When you have a moment." The request, delivered in a professional tone that offered no hint of his intentions, sent a chill through Stephanie. "Of course, sir." Right after I complete the service, nearby passengers exchanged glances, many now aware of who Darius was and what had transpired at the gate. The cabin buzzed with anticipation of the coming confrontation. Stephanie completed the meal service with mechanical efficiency, her mind racing through potential excuses and explanations. Nothing seemed adequate in the face of what she had done. When she returned to check on Darius, he gestured to the empty seat beside him. "Please, join me for a moment." It wasn't a request. Stephanie sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. "How long have you been with Celestial, Ms. Miller?" Darius asked, his tone conversational. 10 years, sir. And in that time, what would you say is the company's approach to passenger concerns?" Stephanie hesitated, sensing the trap. "We take all passenger feedback seriously and strive for excellence in customer service." "Interesting." Darius tapped his tablet screen. "Because I've been reviewing some data that suggests otherwise, specifically regarding certain types of passengers, sir." "About what happened at the gate?" Stephanie began, abandoning pretense. "I was simply following security protocols. It had nothing to do with, I didn't know who you were, and..." "That's precisely the point, isn't it?" Darius interrupted, his voice still calm but now carrying an edge of steel. "You didn't know who I was, so you made assumptions based on what you could see. My appearance, my skin color." "No, sir, that's not..." "Ms. Miller," he cut her off. "Again, please don't insult my intelligence by denying what we both know happened. The more interesting question is whether this was an isolated incident or part of a pattern." He turned his tablet toward her, showing a spreadsheet of passenger complaints with her name highlighted repeatedly. Stephanie's blood ran cold. These were supposed to be confidential. She whispered, "They were buried." Darius corrected, "Not the same thing." "Did you think those complaints simply disappeared?" Before she could respond, the plane hit another patch of turbulence. The sudden motion sent Stephanie lurching forward, grabbing Darius's armrest for support. For a brief moment, their eyes met at close range, her fear palpable, his resolve unwavering. As the turbulence subsided and Stephanie regained her composure, a message notification appeared on Darius's tablet from company headquarters. Additional information on S. Miller's situation. Multiple incidents with minority staff members as well as passengers. HR director requesting urgent call upon landing. Stephanie caught a glimpse of the message before Darius turned the screen away. Her last Hope of surviving this encounter evaporated. It seems your reputation extends beyond passenger interactions, Darius commented. Tell me, Ms. Miller, are you familiar with SkyRoute's workplace policies? I've heard they're quite progressive, she managed. They're quite simple, actually. We judge people solely on the quality of their work and the content of their character. Nothing else matters, not race, not gender, not who they know or where they come from. He paused, letting the words sink in. And we have zero tolerance for those who operate differently. The implicit threat hung in the air between them. In the galley, Jordan was engaged in a hushed conversation with Lisa and another flight attendant, Kevin. She's done for, Kevin whispered. I overheard a passenger say Washington has been reviewing complaints against her on his tablet. It's not just her, Lisa added. I heard from Gates staff that they're reviewing the whole management team. Apparently, Washington thinks the culture is toxic from the top down. Jordan nodded grimly. We're all complicit, you know. How many times did we see her profile passengers and say nothing? How many times did we hear complaints and just shrug, because that's just how Stephanie is? The realization landed heavily on all three of them. Their silence had enabled Stephanie's behavior to continue unchecked for years. Back in first class, Stephanie was attempting to salvage her career with increasingly desperate explanations. Sir, I've always prided myself on maintaining the highest standards for Celestial. Perhaps some passengers misinterpreted my thoroughness as something else. But I assure you, Ms. Miller, Darius interrupted, his patience visibly thinning. Let me be direct. I'm not interested in explanations or excuses. I'm interested in evidence. And the evidence suggests a consistent pattern of discriminatory behavior that has somehow gone unchecked for years. But my record, your official record, is impressive. He acknowledged, suspiciously so, given the number of complaints that never made it into that record. Which raises another question entirely about who was protecting you and why. The implication that her relationship with the former CEO had crossed professional lines caused Stephanie's face to flush with anger and embarrassment. That's completely inappropriate, she hissed. No, Ms. Miller. What's inappropriate is treating passengers differently based on their appearance. What's inappropriate is creating a hostile environment for colleagues of color. What's inappropriate is abusing your position to humiliate people you deem unworthy of respect. His words stripped away her remaining defenses. For the first time in her career, Stephanie Miller was facing consequences, and the reality was overwhelming. Her breathing quickened, her vision narrowing as panic set in. I need to check on other passengers, she stammered, rising unsteadily from the seat. Darius simply nodded. We'll continue this discussion after landing. Watching her retreat to the galley, he knew the confrontation wasn't over. It was merely paused. The real reckoning would come once they were on the ground. Has this story resonated with you so far? Comment number 1 if you've witnessed similar discrimination in your travels. Like this video if you believe accountability is essential in the workplace. Subscribe to see how this tense situation resolves. What would you do if you were in Darius's position? Would you fire Stephanie immediately, or try to address the larger cultural problems at the airline? As the plane began its initial descent toward San Francisco, Stephanie huddled in the galley, experiencing what she recognized as a full-blown panic attack. Jordan found her there, gasping for breath, tears streaming down her normally composed face. He knows everything, she whispered between ragged breaths. The complaints, the incidents, even about Thomas Jenkins. Jordan handed her a cup of water. What did you expect, Stephanie, that it would never catch up to you? I never thought of myself as racist, she said, the word feeling foreign on her tongue. I was just doing my job, maintaining standards, for some passengers more than others, Jordan pointed out, his tone not unkind but unyielding. We all saw it, we all knew, and we all stayed silent, which makes us part of the problem too. His admission of complicity wasn't what Stephanie expected. It forced her to confront an uncomfortable truth. Her behavior hadn't existed in a vacuum. It had been enabled by a system that allowed it to continue without consequences. As the captain announced their final approach to San Francisco, Stephanie realized the plane's descent mirrored her own career trajectory. rapidly approaching an inevitable crash. The Airbus A320 touched down at San Francisco International Airport with a gentle bump, its wheels making contact with California's soil at precisely 12:40 p.m. local time. For most passengers, this moment marked the successful completion of a journey. For Stephanie Miller, it felt like the beginning of the end. The instant the wheels touched the runway, Darius Washington's phone connected to the network, lighting up with notifications, messages from the executive team, updates from corporate security, media inquiries about the video that had now gone viral across multiple platforms. He responded to the most urgent message from his chief of staff, meeting in SFO Executive Lounge. Upon deplaning, have HR and legal representatives present in the galley. The captain's voice crackled over the intercom. Cabin crew, prepare for arrival. Also, all Celestial staff are required to remain on board for a brief meeting after passengers have deployed. Ned, the announcement sent a wave of murmurs through the crew. Such instructions were highly unusual and confirmed what many already suspected. The confrontation between Stephanie and Darius was about to reach its climax. "What should I do?" Stephanie whispered to Jordan, panic evident in her voice. "Face it." He replied simply, "Whatever happens now, hiding will only make it worse." As the plane taxied to the gate, Stephanie moved through the cabin on autopilot, instructing passengers to remain seated until the seatbelt sign was turned off. When she reached Darius's row, she avoided eye contact, but she could feel his evaluative gaze following her movements. The plane reached the gate, the seatbelt sign dinged off, and passengers began the familiar ritual of gathering belongings and forming the impatient queue in the aisle. Unlike typical flights where crew would stand by the exit wishing passengers a pleasant day, the captain had instructed all staff to remain at their stations. Darius remained seated, allowing other passengers to exit first. His strategic timing was deliberate, building anticipation, while making important calls to finalize what would happen next. James Thornton, the business executive who had been seated nearby, paused at Darius's row. "Whatever you decide to do about that situation," he said quietly, "know that many of us who fly frequently would appreciate a more equitable experience." Darius nodded acknowledgement. "Changes are coming, Mr. Thornton. Today is just the beginning." As the last passengers filed out, a tense silence fell over the cabin. The flight crew exchanged nervous glances. Stephanie stood rigid in the galley, her knuckles white as she gripped a handhold for support. Through the windows, Stephanie could see what the other crew members had already noticed: Celestial and Skyroute executives gathered at the gate, along with airport security personnel. There would be no quiet resolution to this incident. Darius finally rose from his seat, straightening his simple button-up shirt. Without his business suit and entourage, he might not have looked like a typical CEO, but his authoritative presence was unmistakable as he moved toward the front of the aircraft. "Thank you all for your service today," he addressed the crew collectively. "I'd like the entire team to proceed to the executive lounge for a debriefing. Airport security will escort us to avoid any media interaction." His eyes met Stephanie's. Briefly, "Ms. Miller, you'll be joining us as well." It wasn't a request. Stephanie nodded numbly. Understanding escape was impossible. The 6 minutes at the gate had set in motion events that could not be reversed or avoided. As they deplaned, Stephanie noticed several passengers waiting near the gate, phones raised to capture the aftermath, the video of her confrontation with Darius had clearly identified her to the public, and now they were hungry for the conclusion to the drama. Security personnel formed a protective corridor, guiding the Celestial crew and Darius through the terminal toward the private lounges. Stephanie felt like a prisoner being escorted to trial, the curious stares of travelers burning into her back as they passed. The airport's executive lounge had been hastily converted into an impromptu meeting room. As the doors opened, Stephanie saw approximately 20 people already gathered: Skyroute executives, Celestial management, legal representatives, and HR directors from both companies. Anthony, the gate manager who had first recognized Darius, was already seated at the table, his face ashen. Other Celestial managers looked equally concerned, their futures suddenly as uncertain as Stephanie's. As security ushered the flight, Crew into the room. Stephanie realized with growing horror that this wasn't just about her confrontation with Darius. This was about to become a very public example of the new management's approach to discrimination within the company. The 6 minutes at the gate had merely been the catalyst for what was clearly a much larger reckoning. The executive lounge fell silent as Darius Washington entered. Despite his casual attire, his commanding presence was undeniable. He moved to the head of the conference table with the natural authority of someone accustomed to leadership. "Thank you all for assembling on such short notice," he began, his voice measured and authoritative. "For those who don't know me, I'm Darius Washington, CEO of Skyroute Airlines, and, as of 3 weeks ago, the chief executive of Celestial Airways." No one spoke. The tension in the room was palpable as Celestial staff exchanged nervous glances. "Today, I experienced Celestial's service firsthand, as I do with all Skyroute acquisitions," Darius continued. "My experience was illuminating." With a nod to his assistant, a large screen at the end of the room activated, displaying the video of Stephanie confronting Darius at the gate. The footage, captured by another passenger, showed the entire 6-minute interaction in painful clarity. Stephanie's dismissive tone, her unfounded suspicion, her attempt to have security remove a valid first-class passenger based on nothing more than appearance. Stephanie's face burned with shame as her colleagues watched. The video evidence was damning, capturing nuances of her behavior that even she hadn't fully recognized in the moment. When the video ended, Darius remained silent for several seconds, allowing its impact to resonate throughout the room. "Ms. Miller," he finally said. Turning to Stephanie, "Would you care to explain your actions?" All eyes turned to Stephanie. Her prepared excuses suddenly felt hollow in the face of such clear evidence. "I was following security protocols," she began weakly. "With so many concerns about ticket fraud and passenger safety, I was simply being thorough in my verification process." Darius raised an eyebrow. "Interesting. Let's look at some additional context." The screen changed to display a compilation of security footage from previous Celestial flights, showing Stephanie interacting with various passengers. The pattern was undeniable. White passengers in premium cabins received cursory ticket checks and friendly greetings, while passengers of color faced extended scrutiny, additional ID verification, and often thinly veiled suggestions that they might be in the wrong section. "This isn't about one incident," Darius stated flatly. "This is about a pattern of behavior that has apparently been tolerated at Celestial Airways." He turned to Anthony, the gate manager. "Mr. Scott, were you aware of Ms. Miller's approach to passenger verification?" Anthony shifted uncomfortably. "I had received some comments from passengers over the years." "Comments," Darius repeated. "And what actions were taken in response to these comments?" "They were documented and forwarded to management as per protocol," Anthony replied, his voice strained. "Yet Ms. Miller's official record shows no such complaints," Darius noted. Turning to the Celestial HR director, "Ms. Benson, perhaps you can explain this discrepancy?" Patricia Benson, Celestial's longtime HR director, cleared her throat nervously. Certain complaints were handled at the executive level due to Ms. Miller's status within the company. "Her status," Darius repeated, letting the implication hang in the air. "And who made the determination about which complaints deserved formal documentation?" Patricia's eyes flicked briefly toward the former CEO's empty chair. "That decision came from executive management." As the questioning continued, the systemic nature of the problem became increasingly clear. Stephanie's behavior hadn't existed in isolation. It had been protected and enabled by a corporate culture that valued connections over conduct, that buried complaints rather than addressing them. "Since the announcement of our acquisition," Darius continued, "Skyroute's transition team has been reviewing Celestial's internal systems. What they discovered was troubling, to say the least." The screen displayed a flowchart showing how passenger complaints were processed, or rather, how certain complaints were diverted into a secondary system where they essentially disappeared. "From official records, this isn't just about one flight attendant," Darius stated. "This is about a system designed to protect certain employees, while ignoring the legitimate concerns of customers and staff." As if on cue, the door opened, and a man Stephanie hadn't seen in 2 years entered, Thomas Jenkins, the flight attendant she had helped terminate after he reported her discriminatory behavior. Mr. Jenkins has provided a detailed account of the hostile work environment he experienced at Celestial, Darius explained, along with documentation of how his complaints were not only dismissed, but ultimately used against him to justify his termination. Thomas's eyes met Stephanie's briefly, his expression not vengeful but resolved. This wasn't about personal retribution, it was about systemic correction. As more evidence was presented, Stephanie's remaining defenses crumbled. The carefully constructed justifications she had built over years of unchecked behavior collapsed under the weight of irrefutable evidence. In a final, desperate attempt to salvage her position, she played her last card. "I've always had the support of senior management," she stated, her voice taking on a hint of defiance. "My connection with former CEO Harrison, Mr. Harrison, is no longer with the company," Darius interrupted sharply. "And whatever protection that connection provided ended the moment Skyroute acquired Celestial." He stood, addressing the entire room now. "Let me be absolutely clear about Skyroute's position on discrimination of any kind. We have zero tolerance, not limited tolerance, not selective enforcement. Zero tolerance." The silence in the room was absolute as everyone absorbed the finality of his words. "Ms. Miller," Darius continued, turning directly to Stephanie, "your employment with Celestial Airways is terminated, effective immediately." The words, though expected, still landed like physical blows. 10 years of her career ended in a single sentence. "But this isn't just about one employee," Darius added, his gaze sweeping across the Celestial executives present. "This is about a corporate culture that allowed such behavior to flourish." Over the coming weeks, Skyroute will be conducting a comprehensive review of Celestial's management practices, complaint procedures, and corporate values. The implication was clear. Stephanie was merely the first casualty in what would be a broader organizational transformation. "Security will escort you to collect your personal belongings," Darius informed Stephanie. "Your company credentials and access have already been deactivated." As security personnel approached, Stephanie felt the weight of 24 pairs of eyes on her. The shame of such a public dismissal was overwhelming, but even in that moment, she recognized the justice in it. For years, she had humiliated passengers in equally public ways, secure in the knowledge that her connections protected her from consequences. Those days were over. As Stephanie was escorted from the room, her badge and credentials confiscated, she caught a final glimpse of Darius Washington addressing the remaining staff. The message was unmistakable. A new era had begun at Celestial Airways, and there would be no place for the discriminatory practices of the past. The 6 minutes at the boarding gate had changed everything, not just for Stephanie Miller, but for an entire corporate culture that had enabled her behavior for far too long. 1 month after the San Francisco incident, Darius Washington stood before 500 Celestial Airways employees in the company's Chicago training center. The room was filled with flight attendants, pilots, gate agents, and ground crew, the frontline staff who shaped the passenger experience every day. "Change isn't comfortable," Darius acknowledged, his voice carrying throughout the auditorium. "But comfort isn't always conducive to growth." The past 30 days had seen sweeping changes throughout Celestial. The viral video of Stephanie Miller's confrontation with Darius, followed by her public termination, had become a watershed moment for the airline industry. It had sparked national conversations about discrimination in travel and emboldened passengers to share their own experiences across social media platforms. The incident that many of you witnessed or heard about wasn't just about one interaction or one employee, Darius continued. It was a symptom of a deeper cultural problem, one that we're committed to addressing head-on. The transformation had begun immediately. Within 48 hours of the incident, Darius had assembled a task force to review every aspect of Celestial's operations through the lens of equity and inclusion. Their findings had confirmed his suspicions. The problems were systemic, embedded in everything from hiring practices to promotion criteria to customer service protocols. 7 senior executives, including the HR director who had helped bury complaints, had been removed. The secondary complaint system had been dismantled, and all previously hidden reports were now being properly investigated. A new anonymous reporting hotline had been established for both staff and passengers to report discriminatory treatment without fear of retaliation. But perhaps most significantly, every Celestial employee was now undergoing comprehensive anti-bias training. Not the perfunctory online modules that had been the standard before, but intensive, in-person workshops led by experts in diversity and inclusion. This training isn't about making anyone feel guilty, Darius explained to the assembled staff. It's about recognizing that we all have biases, often unconscious ones, that influence our interactions. The difference is in whether we acknowledge these biases and work to overcome them, or whether we allow them to dictate our behavior unchecked. In the audience, Jordan Chen listened attentively. The past month had been challenging, but transformative for him as well. The realization of his own complicity in enabling Stephanie's behavior had forced him to examine his choices and commit to speaking up against injustice moving forward. Following the training session, Darius met privately with a group of Celestial employees who had previously reported discrimination but had their complaints dismissed. Among them was Thomas Jenkins, now reinstated with back pay and a formal apology from the company. "Your voice matters," Darius told the group, "and I want to personally apologize that it wasn't heard before. That changes today, 3 months after the incident." Stephanie Miller's attempted lawsuit against Celestial for wrongful termination collapsed before it even reached court. Her lawyers quietly withdrew the case after Skyroute's legal team presented the overwhelming evidence of her pattern of discriminatory behavior. The documentation was so extensive and clear that even Stephanie eventually acknowledged that pursuing the case would only further damage her reputation. Instead, she enrolled in counseling and bias awareness programs, beginning her own journey of self-reflection and accountability. The public nature of her termination had made finding comparable employment in the airline industry impossible, forcing her to reconsider not just her career, but her fundamental assumptions about people. Different from herself. 6 months after the San Francisco flight, Celestial Airways officially became Skyroute Celestial, completing the integration of the two companies. The rebranding came with a new corporate slogan, "Everyone belongs in first class." The transformation wasn't just cosmetic. Customer satisfaction scores, which had been middling under the old Celestial management, rose by 27%. Employee retention improved dramatically. Applications from minority candidates increased by over 40%. As word spread about the company's genuine commitment to inclusion, Darius continued his practice of flying incognito, experiencing the airline's service firsthand. On a flight from Atlanta to Seattle, he sat in economy class next to an elderly black woman who shared her own story of discrimination. While traveling, "Things are changing, though," she told him, unaware of who she was speaking with. That incident with the CEO who fired that flight attendant on the spot, that sent a message. These companies need to understand that everyone deserves respect. Darius smiled. "I couldn't agree more." The most telling transformation, however, came in the everyday interactions throughout the company. Flight attendants, who had previously remained silent when witnessing discrimination, now felt empowered to speak up. Managers who had once overlooked problematic behavior now addressed it directly. The culture of complicity had been replaced by a culture of accountability. In the executive suite that had once protected employees like Stephanie Miller, a framed quote now hung prominently on the wall. "The standard you walk past is the standard you accept." Below it, in smaller text, "We stop walking past. We stand up. We speak out every time." The 6 minutes at the boarding gate had become legend within the company, a reminder that seemingly small moments of discrimination had profound implications, and that true leadership meant taking decisive action when confronted with injustice. For Darius Washington, the transformation of Celestial Airways represented more than a successful business acquisition. It was a testament to his belief that systemic change was possible when leaders had the courage to address problems at their root rather than merely treating symptoms. And for thousands of passengers who would never know the full story, The legacy of those 6 minutes was simply a travel experience, where they were judged not by their appearance, but by the simple fact that they held a valid ticket where everyone truly did belong in first class. The story reveals several powerful truths about discrimination in our society. First, racism often hides behind policies and protocols, allowing people to discriminate while claiming they're just doing their job. Second, systemic problems require systemic solutions. Firing Stephanie alone wouldn't fix the broken culture that enabled her behavior for years. Third, accountability must exist at every level, from frontline employees to executives who protect problematic behavior. Most importantly, this story demonstrates how privilege operates invisibly until challenged. Stephanie never faced consequences because her connections protected her, creating a sense of invulnerability that reinforced her discriminatory actions. It took someone with even greater power to break this cycle. True change requires both individual accountability and structural reform. Darius didn't just address the symptoms, Stephanie's behavior, but the underlying disease, a corporate culture that tolerated discrimination. His approach reminds us that transformative leadership means setting clear standards, modeling inclusive behavior, and ensuring accountability at every level. What would you have done if you were in Darius's position? Comment below if you think his response was appropriate or if you would have handled it differently. Have you witnessed similar discrimination while traveling? Like this video if you believe more companies should take such a strong stance against bias. Subscribe to our channel for more powerful stories of justice and transformation in the workplace. And share this video with someone who needs to hear that change is possible when brave people stand up for what's right. Thank you for watching. And remember, the standard you accept is the standard you promote.